Grandmother Christina lived on the outskirts of a private sector street. Not just on the outskirts, but her house was also cleverly tucked away. So if you didn't know it was there, you could easily pass by, especially when the stove wasn't lit and no smoke rose from the chimney. Her yard resembled a fairy tale: well-tended apple trees, beautiful bushes of raspberry roses, and little streams ran along the perimeter, fed by a river not far from her home. Christina raised 3 children and 7 grandchildren. She cared for them all from infancy, but as they grew independent, they left home and seemed to forget about her. Neither children nor grandchildren visited her, not even on holidays or birthdays, and she tried to forget those dates to avoid unnecessary disappointment. She didn't know their addresses or phone numbers and never attempted to visit them. Yet still, she continued to wait. She dreamt of the day when all her children and grandchildren would gather around a large table, and she would be baking pies just like in the past, bringing back the laughter and joy that had drifted away from her. Every morning, she would kindle the stove, have breakfast, and then stand by the gate leaning on it, gazing into the distance. Her neighbor Alice from the house opposite often came to visit, and Christina would share stories about her children and grandchildren. One day, she asked Alice to help her find her children. Alice noted down all the names and details and went to the address bureau the next day. Alice felt sorry for Christina, who was like a mother to her. Her own mother had long passed away, and she wished her mother could be alive and well. She couldn't understand how Christina's children and grandchildren could distance themselves from her. Christina often treated Alice to her pies and pastries, which she baked for her family, and helped her in any way she could. And now she embarked on a journey to find her children. Alice understood that if they continued to behave in this manner, it was unlikely to make them change, but she believed it was worth a try. The address bureau only managed to find addresses for her eldest son and youngest grandson. There was no information about her other children. Christina was grateful for this information. "William," she whispered. "My son William and my grandson Sergey," she exclaimed, and "You're wasting our money for no reason," he said. "You should come and clean every other day." I looked at him with surprise the first time. Firstly, I spend my hard-earned money. Secondly, how do you envision this? I already come home around 8 in the evening after work. I simply won't have time to do all the cleaning, prepare meals, and give attention to my grandmother. I'd rather have the caregiver take care of the cleaning and cooking. I'll focus on giving attention only to my grandmother, I told him. Harry just grunted dissatisfiedly and didn't bring up the issue again. Grandma, although she always teased me about shopping, I could hear from her tone that she appreciated my care, and that was the most important thing for me. My parents and grandmother constantly suggested that I move in with them, but she refused, saying that she didn't want to burden anyone and was accustomed to living on her own. A few years ago, she transferred her apartment to me as a gift. "You're my only beloved granddaughter. I want the memory of me to remain," she would say. After her funeral, I simply closed her apartment and didn't touch any of her things. I couldn't believe she was no longer with me. It took time for me to accept the loss, and work was the best remedy in this case. For the 3 months following her funeral, I threw myself even more into my job, trying to occupy all my free time. My husband preferred not to disturb me during this period. Only after 3 months did I start going through Grandma's belongings. I donated some to a monastery, kept some for myself as a memory, and decided to rent out her apartment. However, one evening, Harry approached me with a request. My older sister is going through a divorce, but she doesn't want to move back to live with her mother. Maybe she could stay in our apartment, the one we inherited from Grandma. Harry looked at me questioningly. "At least for a couple of months. She needs time to get back on her feet after the divorce," he added. I understood the emotional state one could be in after a divorce, and agreed to let his sister stay in the apartment for a couple of months for free. The next day, she came to our place, thanked us, and took the keys. A few more months passed, and I began to notice that my relationship with Harry was deteriorating, to put it mildly. My husband constantly complained that I didn't manage money wisely, spending too much on expensive food. "Your mom dresses salads with mayonnaise, and it tastes good. Serve it to me like that, just with olive oil." "Do you see how much it costs in the store?" Harry reasoned. My arguments about the cost-effectiveness of healthy eating in terms of medical expenses didn't convince him. These situations, though seemingly minor, left their mark. We stopped going to the theater altogether. It didn't interest me, and I questioned, "What interests you then?" Harry honestly admitted, "I prefer to relax at home on the couch. I get tired after a workday and crave simple human pleasures, a hearty dinner, and relaxation." A year later, the strain in our relationship became even more apparent. I was surprised to discover that the person living next to me had no interests other than a comfy couch and delicious, preferably cheap, food to avoid tainting the pleasure with memories of how much he spent on it. Harry stopped showing me signs of affection. They say it's empty, no matter how hard I tried to explain to him that it's not normal and could lead to divorce. He dismissed it discontentedly, saying I was making a mountain out of a molehill. Constant reproaches began about my inability to manage money, and he was dissatisfied that by contributing half of his salary to our joint budget, I remained ungrateful. You should be grateful that you have a husband like me. Some husbands don't see the need to give their salary to their wives. Harry lectured me smugly. The final straw for my patience was that his sister had been living in my apartment for a month now and had no intention of paying rent. Every month, she tearfully explained over the phone how difficult it was for her after the divorce. I lacked the courage to ask her to vacate my apartment in such a state or at least pay rent eventually. "Good day, does William Struco live here?" Alice asked, and the woman's expression changed. However, noticing Alice's husband beside her, she shifted her gaze and shouted, "William, your soul is here." From behind her emerged a middle-aged man with thick dark chestnut hair. It was strange that he looked completely different from the woman. Clean, well-groomed, and sober. I apologized for my wife. She doesn't drink at all, but sometimes she has these flashes of anger. "And who are you?" he asked, surveying Alice from head to toe. "We're your mother's neighbors," Alice replied, looking him up and down. "What about Mom?" he asked indifferently. "She just wants to see her children." "And here." Alice pulled out a thick envelope from her bag and handed it to him. "She saved it for many years and asked us to share with all of you. I hope you won't let her down." The man took the envelope with slightly trembling hands and nervously said, "Yes, all right. I'll visit her in a few days." Alice and her husband silently turned and left. "All right, Alice, tell me about my son. How is he living? What does he look like?" "Well, with your son, everything seems fine, Aunt Christina, and he looks quite decent. But as for how he's living, I don't know. He hasn't invited us to his home." "What? He didn't even offer you tea?" "No, he didn't offer us tea, and we didn't feel like going in anyway." Alice sighed sadly, looking at the poor woman. And Christina took out of the chest a new colorful scarf, a dress she bought a long time ago but never had a reason to wear. The next day, she stood at the gate early in the morning, waiting for her son because he promised to visit her in a few days. However, he didn't come in the following days or even after a month. Every day she stood at the gate, gazing into the distance. "Alice, I'm sorry to bother you, but could you do me another favor, dear? Go visit my grandson, Sir D. Maybe he will come to see me. I can't do this anymore. My soul is exhausted. I just hope that anyone, will come and look into their mother's eyes." At that time, Christina hadn't gotten out of bed for several days, and Alice would come to light her stove, bring food, feed her with a spoon, and clean the floors. "I'll go, Aunt Christina. I'll quickly tidy up the floors after work, and then I'll go visit him. Maybe your grandson will be more welcoming." Her grandson turned out to be more hospitable. He invited Alice into his apartment and offered her tea. His wife came into the room with a baby in her arms and joined the conversation. "Of course, we'll come for a visit. Maybe on the weekend, right, Sir D?" "Yes, of course. We've been planning for a long time, really planning. It's just that life keeps pulling us in different directions, and time doesn't stand still. I often think about Shka. I remember how mischievous I used to be, and she would gently scold me. She never punished me for my mistakes. Now I feel ashamed. I remember how I ruined her dress." The man sighed and immersed himself in deep thought. "And they came over the weekend, as promised. They brought gifts, fruits and sweets." Shka struggled to get up from her bed. She even briefly hugged her great grandson. Her eyes sparkled with boundless happiness, but she quickly had to return to her bed. "Sergei, did William share any money with you?" Shiv asked. "No," Sergei replied in surprise. "We haven't seen him in about 5 years. His wife is struggling with alcohol, and I think he doesn't want to associate with anyone. Probably, it's embarrassing." Christina's eyes saddened. "I understand. What about the others? What do you know about them?"